My name is Evelyn Ward, and for more than 20 years I carried a secret that shaped every choice I made. I can still see the moment it began, standing in our kitchen, onions softening in the pan, shoes damp from the grocery store. A crumpled lottery ticket lay on the counter, one I had almost forgotten. I scraped the numbers with a butter knife, hardly paying attention until the truth stared back at me in the fading light. $120 million. I didn't shout. I didn't even move. I folded the ticket into a worn book on the shelf and stirred the onions before they burned. Marjorie came in humming, setting bread on the counter, kissed my cheek, and never noticed my hands shaking. That night, I laughed with her at the table, said nothing, and told myself silence was safer. The next morning, I claimed the prize alone, choosing anonymity, choosing stillness. I picked up Daniel from school as if nothing had changed. And in many ways, it hadn't. I returned to teaching English at the high school. Marjorie kept her hours at the library. We clipped coupons, patched leaks, wore winter coats until the seams thinned. We lived as if the ticket had never existed. I told myself the money was for Daniel. I wanted him to grow on soil that could not be bought, to measure himself by effort, not inheritance. I imagined giving it to him one day, not as a bribe, but as a blessing. But secrets are heavy things. They bend under time, under grief, under the choices we make when silence seems noble. I didn't know then how much weight I carried, or how quickly it would be tested on the day my son told me he was getting married. After tucking the ticket into a book, life carried on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Our small bungalow in Columbus stayed the same, its porch groaning when someone leaned on the railing. I still taught English at the high school, reading Shakespeare aloud to restless teenagers. Marjorie spent her afternoons in the library, humming as she shelved books. From the outside, we looked like any other family who stretched paychecks and saved coins in jars. We didn't talk about yachts or travel. We talked about lesson plans, Daniel's grades, and what to plant in the garden once spring thawed the ground. The only indulgence I allowed myself was a second-hand armchair from a yard sale, fabric faded but sturdy. Whenever I sank into it at night, I reminded myself that grounding was more valuable than luxury. Daniel was lively and curious, though awkward at times. He would burst in after school, backpack sliding from his shoulder, eager to tell me about a new science project. His eyes shone with the same brightness I had seen since the day he was born. That light convinced me to keep the money hidden. I wanted him to grow with values no dollar could buy. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and only the clock ticked, I imagined sliding the book across the table to Marjorie, confessing what I had done. I pictured her steady eyes softening, her voice reminding me we had built our life brick by brick. Each time, I kept my silence. I believed the money would wait for the right moment, that someday I would know exactly when to reveal it. What I didn't realize was how quickly time would push that moment beyond my reach. The moment I dreaded crept in quietly. At first, Marjorie rubbed her wrist after long shifts at the library, or paused halfway up the stairs to catch her breath. Soon there were appointments, then scans, then the words, "No family wants to hear." By the time it was spoken aloud, the illness had already claimed its ground. I sat by her bed in the hospital, antiseptic sharp in the air, gripping her hand as if sheer will could hold her here. My mind drifted toward the untouched accounts. I could have called specialists, flown her anywhere she dreamed of seeing, but Marjorie only shook her head. "Don't fuss," she whispered. She wanted mornings with tea in her favorite mug, Daniel's voice ringing through the house, and quiet evenings beside me. When she passed, it was spring. Lilacs bloomed outside the window, their sweetness mocking the emptiness in my chest. The funeral was small. Neighbors brought casseroles, speaking in hushed tones. I nodded, accepted their kindness. But inside, I wanted to shout that the world had stolen my anchor. That night, I sat alone on the porch, staring at the garden we had planned but never planted. The tickets winning still waited, growing silently while the person I loved most faded away. I told myself the money was for Daniel now, for his future, for the life he would someday build. I wrapped my arms around her old scarf, breathing in the faint trace of her perfume, and wondered if all my silence had been more cowardice than sacrifice. 2 weeks after the funeral, the phone rang on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The house felt so hollow without Marjorie that even the sound startled me. Daniel's voice came through, bright but shaky. "Mom, I want you to meet someone," he said, words spilling fast like a script he had practiced. Her name was Clara Bennett, a graduate student in business, daughter of a powerful investment family in New York. He told me about her father's firm and her mother's charitable boards as if reading from a resume. I folded laundry while he talked, one of Marjorie's cardigans soft in my hands. Then he said it. "We're getting married." The word married lingered like a note that refused to fade. I pressed the cardigan against my chest before answering. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I can't wait to meet her." The following weekend, Clara stepped into our small living room. She wore a fitted blazer and pearl earrings, though the weather was warm. She shook my hand firmly, her eyes sweeping over the furniture and shelves as though she were cataloging. "So charming," she said, her smile polite but thin. "So lived in." Daniel sat taller than usual, his posture tight, eager for her approval. When I asked about his work at the clinic, he spoke of exposure and partnerships, words that sounded borrowed. Clara nodded when I mentioned I had been a teacher, remarking that storytelling was important for branding. That night, after they left, I stood in the hallway where our family photos lined the wall. Daniel's gap-toothed smile, his first science ribbon, Marjorie's hand resting on his shoulder. I touched each frame, wondering how my son's language had strayed so far from the boy we had raised. A month later, an invitation came for a welcome dinner at the Bennetts' home in New York. Daniel's voice on the phone carried excitement, but underneath I heard caution, as if he already knew how far apart our worlds had grown. The estate stood behind tall iron gates that opened with a code. Perfect hedges lined the drive, every stone on the path gleaming. I wore my navy skirt and Marjorie's pressed daisy brooch, telling myself I belonged anywhere my son was. Victoria Bennett greeted me with a glass of sparkling wine, her eyes scanning me the way an appraiser studies an object. "How charming Daniel's upbringing must have been," she said, her voice sweet but cutting. "Grounded young men are so rare. You must have done your best with what you had." I smiled and thanked her, though the words stung. The dining room was cathedral quiet, lit by a chandelier that dwarfed my entire kitchen. We sat at a long table with two of Mr. Bennett's colleagues. Conversation floated around university endowments and corporate restructures. Daniel nodded along, eager, while Clara glowed at his side. When someone asked if I kept busy, I said I had taught literature. Mr. Bennett grinned without warmth. "Ah, important to stay mentally active," he said. I passed the salt when asked, trying to catch Daniel's eyes. For a moment our gazes met, and I smiled, a plea for connection. But he looked away, answering another question about research grants. Later, as we drove back, city lights flashed across the car windows. Daniel sat beside me in silence, not once meeting my eyes. I pressed Marjorie's brooch into my palm and felt the ache of a silence heavier than words. Back in Ohio, the house seemed emptier than before. One evening, while putting away coats in the guest room, I opened the cedar chest. Marjorie and I once called the someday box. The wood smelled faintly of eucalyptus. Beneath Daniel's old drawings lay an envelope with my name written in Marjorie's familiar slant. I sat on the bed. the paper soft from years of waiting. Her voice came back with every line. She wrote that she had known about the lottery all along, the quiet way I moved that night, the storm I tried to hide. She hadn't confronted me because she understood. "You wanted to protect something," she wrote. I admired that. But then she offered her own vision, a scholarship fund, not just money, but mentorship, for students like Daniel once was, bright, overlooked, yearning for a chance. She even gave it a name, the Marjorie and Evelyn Ward Foundation. "We built this life together," she wrote. "Let's leave something behind that continues together." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears soaking into the ink. All these years I had believed the money was for Daniel, his wedding, his future family. But Marjorie's words reminded me it could be more than inheritance. It could be a legacy that carried both our names. I folded the letter back into its envelope and slipped it into my purse. The weight was different now. The money was no longer a silent secret. It had become a choice, waiting for me to act. A few weeks later, Clara invited me to a brunch at the Bennetts' house to review wedding plans. I rose early and baked lemon scones the way Marjorie used to, arranging them neatly in a tin. Carrying that tin felt like bringing a part of myself into a room that had no place for me. The dining table was already covered with swatches of fabric, tall lilies, and a framed seating chart propped up like a painting. Clara greeted me with a polished smile. Victoria tapped the chart with one manicured finger. "Now, Evelyn," she said, voice sweet as syrup. "We've placed you at table 11. You'll be seated with Graham's business partners' wives. Lovely women, very refined. You'll feel comfortable there." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Table 11, far from the head table, tucked near the terrace. Clara added quickly, "It's quieter, more intimate." I turned toward Daniel. He bent over a draft menu, pretending to read. His silence was deafening. He didn't meet my eyes, didn't speak. I laid my napkin across my lap, listening as they debated roses versus orchids, salmon versus lamb. When Clara asked for my opinion, I murmured something polite and slid the tin of scones across the table. No one touched them. Inside my purse, Marjorie's letter pressed against the leather. Her handwriting echoed in my mind. Dignity, legacy, something larger than us. I knew then that love without respect becomes hollow. When the brunch ended, I thanked them for including me and left the scones behind on the counter, walking to my car. I repeated the words silently, steady as breath, hold the line. The rehearsal dinner was held in a boutique restaurant downtown, marble floors echoing with every step, mirrors so tall they made me feel smaller than I already did. I arrived early, as I always do, but the hostess barely looked at me before leading me to the private room. Inside, Victoria raised her hand as if presenting an afterthought. "Daniel's mother, from out of town," she announced. A few polite smiles flickered, then conversations resumed. Clara's friends offered thin grins before turning back to their phones. One woman glanced at my shoes and asked if they were vintage. "Just old," I replied. A server brushed past with a tray of champagne. "Staff entrance is to the left," he muttered without meeting my eyes. I looked down at my plain black dress and gray cardigan. Clara didn't correct him. She was too busy fussing with the centerpiece, tilting flowers until they were exactly as she wanted. Across the room, Daniel caught my gaze. He gave a small wave, already seated between his future in-laws. He was laughing at something I couldn't hear. I didn't wave back. I found my seat beneath an air vent, ordered tea, and watched the chatter fill the room without me. Later, Clara's brother raised a glass. "To Daniel," he declared, grinning, "for finally upgrading to a better family." Laughter rippled through the room. I lifted my teacup, steady as stone, and said nothing. As the evening wound down, my mind returned to a memory. The dinosaur cake Marjorie and I had baked for Daniel's 5th birthday. Lopsided, too much green frosting, perfect in its imperfection. In that glittering room, the memory squeezed my chest like a truth only I still carried. The wedding day dawned beneath a sky too bright for what I carried inside. The Bennett ballroom glowed with chandeliers, the air thick with roses and expectation. A quartet played as guests drifted to their tables, each place marked with calligraphy and gold-rimmed menus. I searched the chart until I found my name tucked near the kitchen doors, table 14. The chairs wobbled where the carpet ended. My companions were a florist's assistant checking her watch and a nervous intern who thought I was someone's great aunt. They spoke to each other, never to me. I reminded myself I was there for Daniel, not for recognition. I watched my son glide from table to table in his tailored tuxedo, shaking hands, hugging Clara's cousins, thanking Graham Bennett's associates as though they were family. Victoria stood nearby, one jeweled hand on his arm, the other wrapped around champagne. Clara shimmered beside him, every movement polished for an audience. The toasts began before dessert. Daniel took the microphone, smiling with practiced warmth. He thanked everyone for their generosity and praised the Bennett family, their values, their welcome, their legacy. He lifted his glass toward Victoria and Graham, who toasted him back proudly. There was no mention of Marjorie, no mention of me. The applause thundered while I sat still, hands folded in my lap, staring at the untouched cake. My body felt carved from stone, steady only because I forced it. When the music swelled again, I slipped out a side door. On the terrace, summer heat clung to the air. I leaned against the railing, looking at faint stars hidden behind city lights, Marjorie's envelope pressing heavy in my purse. For the first time, I wondered if silence had become betrayal. I lingered on the terrace, the music seeping through the doors, each note glittering for people who hadn't noticed my absence. My hand brushed against Marjorie's envelope in my purse, the paper sharp against my fingers. Something inside me shifted. Silence no longer felt like sacrifice. It felt like surrender. I straightened my cardigan and walked back into the ballroom. They were in the middle of speeches. Victoria held the microphone, Clara glowing, Daniel clapping dutifully behind them. Words like legacy and bright future floated through the air, polished but hollow. I stepped forward, slowly enough that the crowd hushed. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting clean through the chandelier light. The microphone wavered in Victoria's hand. Daniel's brows knit together. "Just a moment," I repeated. "I'd like to speak." The servers froze. The guests turned. I cleared my throat. Every eye locked on me. 20 years ago, I won $120 million. I began. I told no one. I didn't change our house or my job. I raised my son in the same small bungalow because I wanted to see who he would become without it. Gasps rippled through the tables. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. I believed in dignity. I believed in building a life with your own hands. I saved that money, thinking it would one day be his. But tonight I see the truth. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned. And love without respect is a hollow thing. Clara's glass trembled. Graham Bennett stiffened. Victoria blinked like she hadn't understood. I pressed the envelope to my chest once, then slid it back into my purse. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," I said softly. I needed to remember who I am. I had nearly reached my car when I heard the door slam behind me. "Mom, wait!" Daniel's footsteps hurried, then slowed as he caught up. Under the streetlight, His tuxedo jacket hung wrinkled, his tie askew. He looked less like the groom I had just watched and more like the boy who once carried a science project too big for his arms. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked in the night air. "Because I needed to see who you would become without it," I answered. He shook his head. "I never would have let them. You let them seat me at the back." I cut in, not unkindly. "You watched me vanish into silence." His gaze fell to the pavement. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to make a scene. "You didn't need to make a scene," I said. "You only had to look me in the eye." The music throbbed faintly from the ballroom. I reached into my purse and placed Marjorie's envelope in his hands. Your mother knew. She wanted a foundation, not yachts or headlines, something that mattered. Daniel stared at the paper as if it burned. "I thought you were saving it for me." "I was, but not like this." His eyes glistened. "What do I do?" "You decide whether you'll be the man we raised or the man they applaud." I touched his cheek the way I had when nightmares woke him. "You're not a bad man, Daniel. But you forgot yourself. That's the most dangerous kind of forgetting." "Am I too late?" I met his eyes, saw the boy beneath the suit. "Not yet," I whispered. The kitchen was silent except for the scratch of my pen across paper. I signed the last page, dated it, and closed the folder. The Evelyn and Marjorie Ward Foundation was official, funded, structured, built to last longer than grief. With a local attorney and the same accountant who once handled my teacher's pension, I mapped out scholarships and mentorships for students like Daniel once was. Bright, determined, too often unseen. The foundation would pay tuition, books, even living expenses. More than that, each student would be paired with a mentor. Every acceptance letter would carry Marjorie's words, "You matter not for what you own, but for what you dare to become." I poured tea and sat at the old table where Daniel once recited spelling lists, where Marjorie corrected essays with her red pen. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, steady and warm. Daniel hadn't called yet. I didn't expect him to. Unlearning takes time, especially when the world rewards forgetting who you are. But I believed he would return, not to claim money, but to find himself again. And when he did, the foundation would be waiting, not as inheritance, but as invitation. Dignity must always be earned. I looked through the window at the garden Marjorie once filled with sunflowers. The beds were bare now, soil dark and waiting, yet in my mind their golden faces turned toward the light, stubborn and bright. There are many kinds of wealth. Some bloom quietly, some take root. For the first time in years, I felt not only clear, but ready. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.